Hippocrates said 2,500 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. And I spent the last 25 years learning that he was right.
Dr. Stephen Gundry, it is so amazing for you to be here today, sharing your knowledge with us, and I'm very excited to dive in.
All right.
So we talked offline a little bit about gut health and the importance of gut health, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into that. We talked about how people are more exposed to mycotoxins and, feeling effects from that. We talked about the prevalence of cancer. Tell me, how important do you see gut health is, and is this correlated at all with the way in which we're feeling these days?
Well, I wish I had been the first to think about this, but Hippocrates said 2,500 years ago that all disease begins in the gut. And I spent the last 25 years learning that he was right. And that I don't know how he knew it, but he knew it. And we're finally beginning to maybe take him seriously. So, all disease begins in the gut. And all disease can be reversed in the gut. In fact, if most people had actually decent gut health, most bad things wouldn't happen to them. So that's a good place to start.
Well, then the question, of course, begs, how do we get this core gut health that allows this susceptibility to illness take shape?
Yeah, that's actually the subject of my upcoming book that I'm actually writing even as we speak. But just to kind of give you a preference, I wrote the Plant Paradox now 6.5 years ago, and it became a major bestseller, probably because what I was proposing worked. But one of the things that I really wanted people to understand is that prior to about 50 years ago, most of us had pretty doggone good health. We had an amazing collection of bacteria. The different species of bacteria now maybe is upward to 36,000 different species of bacteria in our gut. And that's not counting the number of fungi that live in our gut, and viruses that live in our gut, and worms, etc. That's a huge collection of symbiotic organisms. And one of the things that happens in our gut from our mouth and nose all the way down to our rear end is that gut wall is only one cell thick. And the surface area of the gut is about the surface area of a tennis court inside of us. Now, normally, that gut wall stands between us and everything we swallow. And we only, in that gut wall, we only have one cell thickness that stands between our entire gut microbiome, everything we swallow, all the toxins that we ingest, including mycotoxins, and us. And initially you think, boy, what a stupid design, that everything that we're exposed to is only kept from us by one cell. And that seems like a really dumb design. Well, that dumb design actually needed a bunch of people running interference before all these mischievous compounds that we swallow could get to the gut wall. And that includes our gut microbiome. And our gut microbiome is really the first line of defense, if you will, against everything we swallow. Not only is the gut microbiome capable of eating compounds that we swallow, but it's really good at detoxifying compounds that we swallow, including mycotoxins, which is kind of what we're talking about today. And there's actually some pretty good papers showing that a normal gut microbiome is really good at detoxifying mycotoxins. It's also, just what I'm interested in, really good at detoxifying other plant compounds that wish to do us harm, like lectins, which is one of my favorite subjects. But if you had a great gut microbiome, that's your first line of defense. The second line of defense is that most of us should have a really thick layer of mucus. And mucus is interesting because mucus is mucopolysaccharides, lots of sugar molecules. And a great number of the things that wish us harm, plant defense compounds, fungal defense compounds, are attracted to sugar molecules and bind to sugar molecules. And once they bind to sugar molecules, they're essentially inactivated or gummed up, if you will. And so we would have a second line of defense. The first line is our gut microbiome. The second line is our mucus. And I neglected one further line of defense, stomach acid. Stomach acid is actually really good at breaking down a great number of proteins that we swallow that wish us harm. And so we got this multiple layers of defense before you ever get to this stupid one cell layer of cells protecting us. So far, so good?
So far, so amazing. Thank you very much for imparting all of that on us. I think it's really interesting that you talk about this, the three barriers really that help protect us. And, I've always had this question myself of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? Because one thing we see is gut health is, being destroyed. And we don't know, is that from the environment destroying it, or is it getting destroyed first and then the environment is then making more of an impact on the person? And so I think it's really great to really understand how important gut health is to this. Do you know that answer, the chicken or the egg, or have a theory on that?
Yeah, I think I know the answer. None of this. Well, I'll give you a great example, which I think leads right into what we want to talk about today. When I was growing up in the 1950s and 60s, nobody, a long time ago, nobody had peanut allergies. And I can assure you that every one of us brought a peanut butter and jelly sandwich to school every day. Peanuts were passed out in the classroom. Peanuts were given on airplanes as snacks. And nobody was carrying EpiPens to school. Now, what's really interesting, and I wrote about it in my first book, is that human beings, about 95% of humans, carry a preformed antibody to the peanut lectin. And yet, there we were eating peanuts right and left, and nobody was dying of a peanut allergy. So now, of course, some poor little kid opens a package of peanuts in school, and 4 kids are diving for their EpiPens. And it's like, what the heck? Why is there such a difference? Well, what I'll propose to you is that 50, 60 years ago, most of us had a pretty doggone good layers of protection in our microbiome, in our stomach acid, in our mucus barrier to keep our gut wall intact. Why is that so important? Well, our immune system is actually educated by our gut microbiome. The gut microbiome tells the immune system, hey, these are the things that you ought to really be interested in. And these are the things that don't worry about so much. We'll take care of them. We've got your back. And even if you see them, you really shouldn't be all that interested in them. Okay. And that's kind of how this system's supposed to happen. But if you have a gut microbiome is destroyed, number one, it doesn't tell the immune system, okay, here's the good guys, here's the bad guys. We're not around to tell you about this anymore. You're going to have to learn on your own. But if you then have a leaky gut, and a leaky gut because of all these things we talked about, 80% of your immune system is literally housed on the other side of this single wall of cells. Why? Because that's the border where bad things can come across, and your immune system wants to be ready. Now, so it's not an accident that 80% of our immune system lines are gut wall, lines are bronchial tubes, because that's where mischief comes across. So if mischief is now coming across constantly, our immune system, rather than, I use the example of a London Bobby, a policeman in London walking around with his billy club as his only armament, that's what our immune system used to be like. Now our immune system is carrying an AK-47 or an Uzi, and rather than just having a nice day, now it's always ready to fire at any little thing. And so getting back to the peanut lectin, what was absolutely of no interest to my immune system carrying the billy club, which had been told by my gut microbiome, hey, that's not very important. Yeah, it's really not going to bother you. Now that same peanut lectin gets through the wall of my gut or gets into my bronchial tube, and now my immune system has got an Uzi and goes, oh my gosh, that's a foreign particle. And so it's no wonder that these things that never used to happen are happening every day. So that's number one.
By the way, that is probably one of the coolest ways I've ever heard of mast cell activation syndrome being described, where your immune system's hyperactive. And I think that's a good representation of what's happening. I guess the baking question that comes out of this is, how did we get here, right? I mean, what's happened over these 50 years, to us that's made us this hyperactive?
It's actually pretty simple. Sadly. So I'm old enough, again, to remember I was in medical school when broad spectrum antibiotics were introduced in the mid 1970s. And quite frankly, they were miraculous. Before broad spectrum antibiotics, we had to culture bacteria from sputum, from wounds, hope it would grow, figure out what that bacteria was, and then figure out what antibiotic might work against it. And it was a time-consuming process, and quite frankly, we couldn't grow most bacteria. So we were kind of shooting in the dark. When broad spectrum antibiotics came out, we could care less anymore. We basically, rather than having a 22 caliber pistol, we now had a shotgun, and we could just blast the living hell out of whatever bacteria we guessed might have been in our patient, and they were miraculous. What we didn't know was that while we were killing this particular bacteria, we didn't care what it was, we were killing all of the bacteria in our gut, unbeknownst to us, because we didn't really even know that they existed. I'll give you a very interesting story, how I got interested in this. I was a medical student at the Medical College of Georgia, which is the Georgia State University. And we, during that time, saw a number of people with a very odd colitis that had never existed before. It was called pseudomembranous enterocolitis. And these people were profoundly sick, and it always happened after we were treating them for an infection. And all of a sudden, they developed this life-threatening infection in their colon wall. And there was no treatment, and they basically all died. And the head of surgery, Arlie Mansberger, said, you know something? I have a feeling that we have destroyed whatever is good inside these people's guts, and something has taken over and is infecting the inside of these people's guts. And I'll bet you that if we put normal bacteria back inside these people's guts, that it would go away. So, and this is in the 1970s. And so medical students would once a week take a crap in what we called the honey pot, and it would be taken to Dr. Mansberger's lab and put in a Waring blender, I kid you not, and we would then put it in an enema bag, and we would give people fecal enemas from medical students with pseudomembranous enterocolitis. Now, everybody now knows that pseudomembranous enterocolitis is caused by Clostridium difficile, C. diff. And back in the 1970s, Arlie Mansberger cured C. difficile infections with medical student poop. And so the point of all that was that we reconstituted the gut microbiome, and the good guys overwhelmed the bad guys, and everything calmed down. So number one, the group at Sonnenberg, the two scientists, husband and wife team, have really shown that our microbiome, compared to, say, the Hansa microbiome, the hunter-gatherers in Africa, is decimated. It's a wasteland compared to what is normal. So that's number one. Number two, we've done a tremendous job of breaching our gut wall almost on a daily basis, thanks to pharmaceutical companies giving us NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, like Aleve, you name them. They're now the widest selling over-the-counter medication there is. I mean, we have children's Aleve. It's like, oh my gosh. And it turns out pharmaceutical companies have known from their inception that they are like swallowing hand grenades. They actually blow gaping holes in the walls of our intestines. And I'm old enough to remember when these drugs were introduced in the 1970s, you could only use them with a prescription, and you could only use them for 2 weeks because they were that dangerous. Yeah. Wow. And so on a daily basis, we, to alleviate our pain, swallow these pills, which create leaks in the wall of our gut. Now, one of the consequences of creating those leaks is that you start inflammation. And the more inflammation you get, the more pain you have. So you'll take more of these substances. And the pharmaceutical industry knew this. And in fact, there's really good papers that I cite in the Plant Paradox showing that they knew this. The third thing that happened is that we've been convinced by Larry the Cable Guy and people like that, that you really want to eat a corn dog or a bowl of chili, and you really don't want heartburn from doing that. And so Prilosec, OTC, or Nexium will allow you to indulge in all those fabulous foods without worry. They didn't bother to tell anybody that the acid in your stomach is one of the most important things you have to protect against all these things that you're swallowing, getting down and causing leaky gut. And now a huge number of us have no acid in our stomach anymore. So those are just three things. And we can go on and on and on. Actually, let me add one more. The same time, Monsanto patented glyphosate as an antibiotic. It was actually not patented as a biocide, an herbicide. It was patented as an antibiotic. Yeah. Now, yeah. Now, they rapidly found out that it had a much better use as than an antibiotic, that it was a great, herbicide. And they found some pond scum growing in one of their ponds outside of one of their plants that seemed to grow just fine, despite the fact that it was swimming in glyphosate. And they said, wow, look at that. This creature, this can withstand glyphosate. And I think we'll blend that into, plants, and it'll be resistant to Roundup and everything else won't. So they convinced the federal government, the FDA, that don't worry, glyphosate is harmless to humans, because glyphosate works on this really fun pathway in plants called the shikimate pathway. And the shikimate pathway doesn't exist in humans. So you could swallow Roundup to your heart's content, and you'll be fine. And what they didn't bother to tell anybody is that the reason glyphosate was patented as an antibiotic is bacteria use the glyphosate pathway. So unbeknownst to us, every time we eat a food that has been sprayed with Roundup, and most of the foods that we eat now have been sprayed with Roundup, even conventional foods, we kill off our intestinal bacteria. Thank you.
One of the things that came to mind is no good idea ever starts with the words "don't worry." And it's exactly what we got. So it comes down to drugs, right? We had, broad spectrum antibiotics, which not only killed the bad bacteria, but killed the good bacteria. We had over the counter medications that destroyed our gut, which, I'd never even thought in that direction about how that can make an impact. And, as a kid growing up, it was, you have a headache, you take a pill, stomach hurts, take a pill. And even the antacids, of course. So it's starting to take shape and make a lot of sense. And I bet, if we were to continue this convo, there's probably some things in the food industry that aren't helpful either. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. I mean, one of the things that's becoming scarier and scarier is all of these preservatives that are used to preserve our foods are actually really good at changing our gut microbiome, for actually promoting gut dysbiosis. In my new book, microplastics, which are now sadly present in most of the fish we eat, most of the animals we eat, are also capable of completely changing our gut microbiome from a friendly community to a dysbiotic community. And we also know that these endocrine disruptors in our plastics are also completely capable of changing our gut microbiome. So we've gone from, a pretty doggone decent society where we've got this incredible ecosystem living inside of us that is protecting us and controlling our immune system, to now just, a scorched earth that's going on inside of us, and we're defenseless. So it's no wonder that our immune system in most people is just constantly hyperactivated, because literally it's like Star Trek. The force fields are gone, and the Klingons are making their final approach. So that's what we've been up against, and it's all our doing. And you look at these primitive societies, and they haven't been exposed to any of this, and that's why they don't get what we get. And getting back, to why we're on the air right now, I spent a lot of my time growing up in the South, and quite frankly, mold was everywhere. If you didn't have mold growing on some portions of your home, in your home, behind somewhere in your refrigerator or whatever, in your bathroom, it was abnormal not to have mold. And yet nobody had these issues. Why? Because we had a really good system of living with this and defending against this. And our immune system was, quite frankly, told, you got a lot better things to worry about. We got this. And now the same things that we could have lived with 50 years ago, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, now we're defenseless.
Well, it's kind of like the perfect storm too, because, if you look back at 1970, and we started going more towards that energy efficiency route in our homes and buildings, we're also breathing in a lot more of chemicals and microplastics and mold and bacteria and viruses and toxins and you name it. And so when our immune systems are hyperactive and our guts are leaky, it's like, how the heck do you get ahead? One of the things that really resonated with me is kind of like we've done all of these different things wrong, and now we're kind of dealing with the consequences of that. What do we do about this, right? How do we reverse this? How do we look at things and get better and smarter as a society?
Well, the pessimist in me says that sickness is good for business. And I have a little slide, I should put it up behind me, of a first day of medical school, and the professor is at the board with his pointer. And he said, rule number 1, a patient cured is a customer lost. And sickness is really good for business. There are so many big pharma, big agriculture, big medicine has no interest in changing this. In fact, the sicker we are, the better. And so it has to come from, government's not going to do this. Government is paid by the pharmaceutical industry and big agriculture. It's just, don't get me started on how much each congressman gets from a big pharma every year.
It's public information. Go Google some super PACs. You'll see. It's crazy.
It's crazy. Anyhow, for instance, there's phenomenal evidence that one of the most widely prescribed drugs for rheumatoid arthritis, Humira, has never been shown to be superior to an old drug, methotrexate, in treating rheumatoid arthritis. Methotrexate will cost you about $5 a month. Humira, if you're lucky, will cost you $10,000 a month or more. But it's never been proven to be any better. Why is it prescribed? Because doctors are convinced by a cute little salesperson that it's a much safer, better drug, even though it's not. Anyhow, don't get me started. So, government will never change. So it has to be individual consumers who go, something is really wrong. And, I'm fed up and I'm not going to take it anymore. And that's actually why I do what I do, is because there are steps that people can take. And that's why you do what you do, is because people have to understand that this is a fixable problem. And you're right, our energy efficient homes are part of the problem. We recently had the founder of Air Doctor on my podcast, the Dr. Gundry Podcast. And we just went into the ways, for instance, burning candles in our home, which, it's touchy-feely and adds a wonderful fragrance. Most of those fragrances are really bad endocrine disruptors and really bad, phthalates that are changing our kids' behaviors, and all for the name of having a scented candle in your home. And these air fresheners probably don't get you and me started. These are just putting just incredible toxic chemicals into our air, that we breathe. And we're oblivious to the fact that these things are just destroying our health.
So we have to make, as consumers, better choices, and unfortunately, as you said, the government's not really advocating for us. We have to advocate for ourselves. And I think that's been something that I've discovered in my career, is opposed to, how do we make things better? Um, Regardless of, what came first, the chicken or the egg, when it comes down to improving somebody's home, for example, yeah, there's a science behind that. You can measure things, you can look at data, and you can improve data. And I think that what it really comes down to for me, is looking at that from that perspective. If you have a water damage event in your home right now, you call your insurance company, they're going to handle it cosmetically, not scientifically. And that's kind of where, where my line of work has come in, is how do I help people create scientifically improven, healthier environments? And obviously they still need to deal with the gut issues, and they still need to heal, but just to get somebody some relief, is really my goal.
Yeah, we've had a number of actually mold experts who have become my patients, and they've been literally driven out of their homes, a couple of them new homes, because of the air toxicity in their homes. But interestingly, and all of these people had, quite frankly, measurable leaky gut. We can measure leaky gut with blood tests, and we can show that you can repair leaky gut. It can take, quite frankly, 9 months to a year to do it successfully. But these people, when we repaired their leaky gut and proved to me and them that their leaky gut was sealed, they could actually go back into these homes which were toxic to them and do just fine, even though some of that toxicity was still there. And again, I think that's because, from my standpoint, we've retrained the immune system, and we've reestablished a healthy gut microbiome that can handle a lot of this that was thrown at them in years past. And again, we're defenseless right now. And that's the good news, actually, from my standpoint.
It's amazing news, because, for a lot of people, you hear stories where, they get debilitated. There's a confluence of factors, of course, and they're getting, every time they're in their home, they don't feel well. They go out on vacation, they feel amazing, right? It's something weird in their home that's triggering these symptoms. And, for a lot of people, even when they get their home fixed, yes, they're doing great. But if they go back to any moldy environment, for example, and if mold seems to be a trigger for them, what ends up happening is those symptoms come back with a vengeance, and I think it's got to be about, you can't just fix the environment and be sensitive to it. You have to also do the work internally. And I think it starts with identifying leaky gut and fixing that gut. From everything you're saying, is going to be invaluable for these people listening that might be experiencing that. How do you identify leaky gut? How do you know you have it, and what kind of steps do you take to make a difference?
Well, you can certainly. So if you have an autoimmune disease, you name the autoimmune disease, I can guarantee you that you have leaky gut. If you have diabetes or pre-diabetes, I can guarantee you that you have leaky gut. If you have arthritis, I guarantee you have leaky gut. If you have heart disease, believe it or not, heart disease is not caused by high cholesterol, it's caused by leaky gut. And we can talk about all that, but most things that I see now are caused by leaky gut. Migraine headaches, leaky gut. And I used to have migraine headaches. I used to do baby heart transplants with a migraine headache. I don't recommend doing that, but somebody has to do it. I don't have migraine headaches anymore. I haven't had one 25 years. So, and we see a large number of people with migraines who, once we fix this, the migraines go away. So it is possible. So you can have measurements of leaky gut. Dr. Alessio Fasano, who's now at Harvard, was one of the first people to prove that gluten and other lectins are a major cause of leaky gut. And you can measure these markers of leaky gut on blood tests, and you can actually watch these measurements go away. Interesting to me, most people that we measure leaky gut also have antibodies to wheat, rye, barley, corn, oats, and we can have people's antibodies to these compounds go away over the course of 9 months to a year. Just talked to a patient yesterday who's been gluten-free for 20 years and yet had a lot of symptoms. And when we checked he still had antibodies to gluten, even though he hasn't eaten gluten in 20 years. And he was just apoplectic. He'd go, "What? That's impossible. I don't eat gluten." And I said, and he's got leaky gut. And I said, it doesn't matter. You've got leaky gut, and your immune system is carrying around oozes. And yeah, it hasn't seen gluten for 20 years, but it is ready. The gluten poster is on the post office wall, and it said, "Hey, if you see gluten, shoot to kill." And you're ready. And he said, "This is ridiculous." And I said, "Well, that's why we're here." So anyhow.
So if I gather correctly, right, the goal here is to stop exposing ourselves to things that can cause leaky gut. B, identify if we have leaky gut, because we're going to want to make those repairs.
Correct.
And that's how we start to get things back on track.
Yeah. And there's one of the hardest things, and I think that's really what my purpose is in now and in writing the new book. One of the hardest things is that it's really much more difficult than I think any of us thought to repopulate this tropical rainforest in our gut, this ecosystem. And because it's truly, we should have 10,000, 20,000 different species of bacteria. And all of them are actually interdependent. One bacteria may make a compound that a second bacteria needs to eat. And if that one bacteria isn't there, the second bacteria isn't getting what it needs to eat. And correspondingly, that bacteria is going to make a compound that we need. And so you've got to have all these guys almost like an assembly line. And one of the things we've come to realize is you don't have that assembly line. You don't have this tropical rainforest. Now, one of the exciting things that I wrote about in my last book, Unlocking the Keto Code, is that fermented foods, which have been known about for a very, very long time, believe it or not, don't work the way people assume they work. People thought fermented foods, they're full of living bacteria, living yeast, and they're probiotic containing foods. And that's how you're going to reconstitute your gut microbiome. And not true. It turns out that gastric acid destroys almost all bacteria that we eat. Well, it's supposed to do that. So all these living bacteria in these fermented foods really aren't going to do anything in terms of constituting living bacteria. But what's really exciting and almost hard to believe is that dead bacteria, the walls of these bacteria, and products that these fermentation produce actually do have the effect of literally telling bacteria that are hiding in the crypts of our intestines, and we won't go into that, but they're actually hiding in small numbers, almost like, what will come out when it's safe. It actually tells bacteria that it's safe to come out. There was a game we played, Ollie Ollie Oxen Free, where everybody hid, and at the game was over, everybody was called out of hiding by saying Ollie Ollie Oxen Free. I don't kids probably don't play it anymore. Anyhow,
I remember it.
Yeah. Okay. So it turns out that these fermented foods actually have compounds that actually start this process. And it's actually really exciting. This was the Sonnenbergs from Stanford actually did an amazing study that I think all of us should be well aware of. We thought that friendly bacteria really want fiber, soluble fiber, to eat. And if you give them soluble fiber to eat, they will make all these great compounds like short chain fatty acid, butyrate, and that in turn will seal our gut, and that in turn will tell our immune system that everything's fine. It makes sense. So Sonnenberg said, yeah, why don't we do an experiment where we take people, one group of people gets a lot of soluble fiber to eat. The other group of people will get the same soluble fiber, but they'll also be given fermented foods. In their case, it was primarily yogurts, but kimchi, apple cider vinegars are fermented foods. And let's see what happens. Well, it turns out the group eating the fiber, nothing happened. Their gut microbiome didn't get more diverse. Their immune system didn't stand down. They still had the same amounts of inflammation. But the group that got the fiber plus the fermented foods, the gut microbiome got much more diverse, and the immune system started to stand down. So that's one of the first kind of pieces of information that we've gotten this wrong. We've got to have these precursors to kind of prime the pump. Once you prime the pump, then these fibrous foods, then they can be utilized. And my new book goes into even more little tricks of, okay, how do we get this going? So the bad news is just eating properly probably isn't going to do as much as we'd hope. We've got to do several other steps to jumpstart this process, and it can be done.
So we got to prime the pump first.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Then get the gas started, and also just eating on its own. Really, it's got to be a regimented step. It sounds like. Yeah.
Again, to use an interesting analogy, since I live in California, we have forest fires. One which destroyed my house a few years ago, but that's another story. If we're eating anti-inflammatory foods because we have inflammation, believe me, that's like fighting a forest fire with a garden hose. It's not going to work. And once you burn down a forest, sure, we can plant little seedlings, but it's going to take 20, 30 years to reconstitute that, ecosystem, that forest. And so we've been really, I think, rather naive that, oh, heck, I'm going to take some antibiotics because I've got a cough and it's not going to hurt me. Those antibiotics can actually decimate your microbiome for up to 2 years, just a single round of antibiotics. And you're not going to rebuild that, tropical rainforest just by swallowing a few probiotics, sadly.
If only it were that easy. It never is, though.
No, it never is. I mean, we thought it was going to be that easy, but we should, this is just like any other complex ecosystem. And we've just been naive that the most complicated ecosystem that exists in us, we didn't even know it existed until 2007. It's only been 15 years since the completion of the Human Microbiome Project.
And only just 50 years ago, doctors were telling us which cigarettes to smoke. So we're making strides here.
We are making strides with that.
And I think, I think we've gotten, there's a sentiment that we need to grasp as a society, that good things take time. And, a lot of people, when I talk to them about, just any health journey, my goal is obviously look at the home environment, office environment, what have you. And, I hear stories about how people are struggling over time, and, no matter what they try, the best things that I've seen with people have success with takes 9, 12, sometimes longer, 9, 12 months, sometimes longer. Yeah. I've even heard people say 2 years, of recovery, and maybe they weren't following your exact protocol and you could have sped up the process. But it just kind of goes to show you, I think the expectation that people need is there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You're not flipping a light switch to turn the light back on. You have to journey down that tunnel, but there is hope.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've been set up to fail, I guess. And I think initially this was all well-meaning. I mean, who would have imagined these? I like to think that these were unintended consequences. The more I get into modern science, the more I'm not convinced that these were unintended consequences, but I'll be nice and say they were unintended consequences. Now I think they're very intended. But and you're right. I mean, I think energy efficient buildings was a really, on the surface, a really good idea. I mean, who wouldn't want an energy efficient building, right? I think, but maybe.
Well, of course, it's a great desire, as long as we don't look at the health of the occupants inside as a secondary byproduct. And I think that's where we've headed. We're using a lot of the products we're using in our modern buildings. They're toxic in and of itself.
Oh, yeah.
And then we seal them so tight that we're just breathing in those toxins all day. Not the best idea. 50 years from now, we'll probably look back and say, what were we thinking? But for right now, we're thinking it's a good idea, apparently.
Yeah, my wife reminds me that her mother always made her sleep with the window open in her bedroom. And we unfortunately still do that every day, even though it was like 34 degrees last night. That's cold in California. And, her mother was probably right. The outside air was far less toxic than the inside air, as you and I now know. And so good idea. Totally. Crack the window.
Good idea. Dr. Gundry, it was such a pleasure having you on today and really getting to hear about, what you believe to be pretty much the cause of all illness, if I heard you correctly, which I think is a really good step forward, because there's so many unknowns out there, right? And we're all grasping at straws and making new medications every day. And we're happy to put labels on people and put them in their basket and tell them what to do. But, I think we have to get down to the basic cause. And leaky gut, I've heard much about this over the years, trying to understand the gap between people's health in their home. And I think you're onto something.
All right. Well, let's hope that all of us can get people's awareness that, we're in a bad place, but we can all working together get out of this bad place.
Exactly. Thank you so much again for your time today.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.